I was born in Highfield, Highcairn Drive, 1955. Went to local school and then went to Ballymartin Boys School. I attended college and I ended up in James Mackey and Sons as an apprentice fitter to start with, but I soon lost because I wanted the big money, as kids did in those days. So I moved on. But I was a member of the Albert Foundry Recreation and Association Club, which owned a big club that is no longer with us anymore. And through that, I got to know a lot of the boys who were playing for the Works football team, commonly known as the Albert Foundry. And the Albert Foundry in itself has a story because people tended to think that the Albert Foundry was from Prince Albert, but actually it was from Albert Street off the Falls Road, where Mackie started his business and then moved it to the Springfield Road and took the name Albert with it, Albert Foundry. So the Albert Foundry, when I was growing up, Paisley Park, for instance, was the place to be. That was the big social club. Started off a small social club up at the top there as you're coming through the gates, and at the side of that small social club was the actual changing rooms for Albert Foundry FC. And being a boy and growing up in that time where we didn't have much contact with English football clubs, there was always a big contact with certain Scottish football clubs, and there was obviously the connection with Irish League Football Club. But a young boy growing up in Highfield, your mainstay of football in those days was Albert Foundry. If you made and you get into the Albert Foundry team, you were talked about in the street. You were a footballer. Local legends, I suppose, or urban legends, if you want to call it that, came through these gates and played for Albert Foundry. Albert Foundry today is something, it has moved beyond football. It is a place where people come to, their camaraderie, boys, girls, men, women. There's a strange thing that has happened with Albert Foundry in these days. Not only have they carried on their success in amateur football, but they've managed, without the effort and just being together, of combating mental health. They bring that to the forefront with their dealings with young girls, young boys. It was always the way at Albert Foundry Football Club. If you had a problem, there was always somebody there to talk to. Oh yes, the banter was there, it never left. But that is just typical of Belfast. Banter is always part of the cure. 1924, James Mackey and Sons decided to set up a recreation and welfare. And they did that. And through that became the Albert Foundry Football Club, the Albert Foundry Bowling Club, and a few other subsidiaries that came later in life. They didn't get Paisley Park, who was named after Peter Paisley, the director in Mackey's, until around about the late 1940s. This area where we're sitting in today, at the far corner over there, was the area where the Home Guard and the Royal Artillery had their ACAC gun, anti-aircraft gun, just at the far corner. Later, that corner was used for people, and what it's called, and you look in the street directory of the time, the West Circular Huts. And you went into one of those huts waiting on your house to be finished in Highfield Estate. And so you can see the intertwining of these threads and the tapestry that it brings forward, that it includes and has to be inclusive of Albert Foundry, its football club and its subsidiary clubs. Right into the community, the place you went to wait on your house was Paisley Park. So Paisley Park from that day to this day has remained prominent in the minds of young people from this area and beyond. Shankill Road, Woodvale, Crumlin, Farsways, I'm sure is Bangor, Hollywood, Carrickfergus. Even in terms of amateur league football, you go to anywhere in the amateur league and you mention the Albert Foundry, they know who you're talking about. They know automatically who you're talking about. And in around about 1947, Brigadier Sinton, VC, declared Paisley Park opened. And they had a works band up at the gates there and played a couple of fancy tunes to open the place up to the public. We moved forward Right through the war, as I say, it became the place for the Home Garden area and the Royal Artillery. And after the war, then it took on its prominence. And it took on its prominence in 1949 when Linfield Football Club, who were icons at that time, I mean, you had people like Billy Simpson and things like that who went on to great fame in Glasgow Rangers. Linfield came as a full side and they played Albert Foundry out there on Paisley Park. And if you look closely at the little photograph of the Foundry and Linfield and the team photograph, there's not a space behind them. The crowd filled the entire upper echelon round the ground. Going through all that, we come round into the 50s, and I think it was in the 50s that they won the Steel and Sons Cup. But even looking at the Foundry today and the cohesion of the people within the Foundry, they're a fantastic club. And the future looks very, very bright. They have academies set up now for boys and girls. And I said to you before, this can do nothing but good for our community. When you have a club, an association of people, Albert Foundry, centred in the middle of that community and projecting out and inviting people in. In the 60s, there was international athletics meetings here. Mike Bull was here. Mary Peters was here. Wayne McCulloch come through here. Although the environment in and around the club has changed, the people in the club haven't. Well, I say they've changed. They're not 100 years old, some of them, but they seem to carry the spirit of that club and that association with them, no matter who takes over here. It seems to ingrain themselves into it, and they carry that through and into the younger generations who will take that forward. We've arrived more or less, the early days over. We're in the 60s. In the late 60s, Albert Foundry came out of the league for failing to fulfil their fixtures. The field, or Paisley Park, the pitch, the ground, became neglected. It was overgrown. It would have been more suited the dairy cows than it would have been the football at those points. And then the evolution begins. Sitting in a club one night, hankering over a name to come back into playing some form of established football within established leagues within Belfast itself. And we arrive at the famous group that was running about, or a famous song that was running about at that time, was called Bay City. So they became Bay City or Bay City Strollers. There could be an argument around that, but that's essentially what it was. Bay City Rollers moved aside to bring in Albert Foundry Colts. And Albert Foundry Colts carried on until they had a main sponsorship from Mountain View Social Club. So the club is now known Mountain View Social Club. That moved on, sponsorship was stopped, and we welcomed in West Belfast Rangers. And West Belfast Rangers then took over the mantle. Moving on from West Belfast Rangers, we arrived then from another club on the Shankill, which is First Shankill, Northern Ireland club, which just had their premises below Lanark Way. And they took over for a certain amount of time, and then, and thank God for it, and then the return of the main theme. Albert Foundry came back into business with, I believe, not rules so much as sort of the mention of, please don't change your name again. So the name has never been changed, and Albert Foundry lives on. I'm so honoured to be invited down to the Albert Foundry today to talk about this. And believe it or me, and that's not cheap words, that's heartfelt words. It is an honour to be here and talk about this fine club. We're not in Belfast. Belfast is in us.